I go out and produce a value, I do good work, I have a successful company, and I'm forced to pay tax dollars at the point of a gun, because if I don't pay it, I go to jail. And that tax dollars then goes to be redistributed to other people who are trying to compete with me, often with an inferior product and no idea what they're trying to do. That's the scenario that we live in today. And that all ties into Bitcoin reaching its end goal. And for people to understand ideologically and philosophically, what's the purpose of Bitcoin? Why is it here? I'm of the opinion that we do need a certain level of government for one purpose only, and that's the protection of individual rights. Nothing else. That's the beginning, it's the middle, and it's the end of government. Ideally, in a utopian situation, we would have Bitcoin and Satoshi be the is-all and end-all for everyone on Earth, period. If we self-destruct ourselves with inflation through printing more and more money and not adopting Bitcoin, like all of that is gone if we self-destruct as a society. If we fail to adopt Bitcoin, if we continue printing money and we all end up in a big giant civil war and everything falls apart. The long-term vision, the long-term thinking, to what you're saying, is really the way that gets most people ahead.
Before we get started with all the topics and the things that you're doing, and I'm really curious with what you're doing with the billboard and the comic book and all those things, maybe give the people some overview of who you are and especially why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Sure. Yeah. I've been an entrepreneur for my whole life. I dropped out of high school in grade 10 to find my own path. And that was my first sort of interaction with the system, sort of not fitting in and not fitting that mold that society's trying to all force us into. So it was the first time I realized that something's wrong with the system. At least for me, it didn't work. And that outside perspective really allowed me to find my own way and to explore the world with sort of a more free mindset than sometimes people go through or when they go through the system. So that was it's a wild journey going through different entrepreneurial ventures through construction. I built a large construction company and sold it, and then had a couple tech ventures. Some of them work, some of them don't. There was a social media company, but really, if we go all the way back, my journey with Bitcoin really started when I was, you could say, 3 or 4 years old, when my parents split up, and they split not just physically but also ideologically. And my mom went down the direction of being self-made, of working, countless overtime and finding a way for us to move forward and be stable in our own way. And my biological father, on the other side, went the other direction, and he went in the direction of, you could say, the welfare state, or the mooch, in terms of Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged, and that philosophy of objectivism. And it sucks if he's listening to this, because I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm just saying this to be objectively accurate. He was a guy that never paid his child support. He never paid my mom for me being a kid, and never really contributed financially at all, and always looked for handouts from the system. And my mom on the other side, like I said, was just hardworking and found her way. So ideologically, there's a difference there. My mom's doing all this work and paying all the tax dollars that are essentially going right to him, and he's not paying any child support in return. It's a one-sided system. And that was my first glimpse as a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old kid. That's what was going on. And it took me obviously decades to really be able to comprehend and digest exactly what's going on, and then form my own opinion around it, which leads me ultimately to here now today, where essentially the welfare state and socialism doesn't work, is my firm stance on this. And having an independent perspective and having our own sovereign mechanisms for surviving in the world is paramount for the survival of our species, in my perspective. And so this has really been a path of exploring what it means to be self-made, to explore the philosophies of objectivism, to explore what a small government, like a night watchman state government, looks like, and to explore a world that doesn't have the financial corruption that we see right now, with a manipulated money supply, and what does the world look like when we do have our own wealth in our own hands. So anyways, that's a little snapshot in my perspective of what Bitcoin, of how I got into Bitcoin, and why it's important to me on a fundamental level.
Really interesting. What do you mean with objectivism, and maybe also how this ties in with Atlas Shrugged?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you've like heard of the author Ayn Rand, the author and philosopher Ayn Rand. She wrote the the masterpiece called Atlas Shrugged. She also wrote a few other books, The Fountainhead, and has a lot of essays out there about selfishness, the virtues of capitalism, the nature of government. And, for me, I really resonated with her writings. And anyone that hasn't checked out Ayn Rand's work, I really suggest that that's something that every Bitcoiner should at least be aware of. Whether you fully agree or not with the philosophy is different, but to at least be aware of it, because the parallels are striking. And in Atlas Shrugged, there's you could say she paints a picture of how society in the welfare state works today, and what it could look like if our top producers worked together in an objective way that basically is founded on the principles of producing good value for society and being separated from corruption of politicians, from corruption of our money supply, and dealing one-on-one in person with other like-minded individuals. And when I look at the Bitcoin ecosystem, I think of people that are aligned on certain values, right? We generally, most of us agree that we should have a money system that's separate from political corruption, and separate from dilution, and separate from a printing press in the Federal Reserve that really has an effect on our inflation. And so we agree that there needs to be a solution and a different money system for the world. And similar in Atlas Shrugged, there's a area called Galt's Gulch, where people of similar mindset also agree that producing value is my way of expressing my individual right, and no one else has an entitlement. No one else is entitled to anything that I've created. No one else can claim a right on it. When you produce this podcast, you're entitled to all the revenue. If someone else comes up to you and says, "Oh, I'm really in need of money, and therefore your value is needing to be reallocated and redistributed to me," you would probably tell them to F off, because it's not their work, right? It's not up to them. It's not they're not entitled to your productive efforts. But in the real world, that's not really how it works today. For example, when I had my construction company, I was forced, obviously, to pay taxes, but through my tax dollars, there was always grant programs, and that grant funding went to support and fund my competition. So I had to ask myself one day, is that really what's happening? And the answer is yes. I go out and produce a value, I do good work, I have a successful company, and I'm forced to pay tax dollars at the point of a gun, because if I don't pay it, I go to jail. And that tax dollars then goes to be redistributed to other people who are trying to compete with me, often with an inferior product and no idea what they're trying to do. And that's the scenario that we live in today. Right. And in the meantime, all that's happening, our inflation is going up, and it's getting more and more difficult to keep our head afloat. So the philosophy of objectivism is to say that that's not right, that system of redistribution and re-equalization of people's wealth is not right. And if you've produced a good value, then you should be entitled to the fruits that value gives to you. And that's essentially the root of objectivism, is the prioritization of individual rights as the is-all and end-all of a priority on a productive society, you could say. And I'm sure that a more in-depth objectivist philosopher would expand on that, but this is my best understanding, and I'm doing my best effort to explain it.
I love that. And it's also, how do you look actually at taxes interacting in a Bitcoin world, and how taxes, do you think there's a place for taxes in a Bitcoin world?
Yes, I do. There are a lot of Bitcoiners that believe more in the anarchistic philosophy, where there is no government at all, period. And I respect that. It's an interesting discussion, and we can, continue that discussion anytime. I'm of the opinion that we do need a certain level of government for one purpose only, and that's the protection of individual rights, nothing else. That's the beginning, it's the middle, and it's the end of government. And what I mean by that is three things. Let's build on my earlier example. You have a great podcast, you make revenue from it. Let's say that I say, no. It's actually my podcast, or I'm entitled to revenue because I'm on here, or I don't agree with your paperwork, or I'm in need, so you need to give me money. Let's say that I make a claim like that. How is it going to get resolved? Is it going to get resolved by us fighting in the street? Are we going to have a shoot off and see who's last man standing? Or are we going to go to some third party that's going to help us resolve it? And is that third party a private enterprise, or is it a public service one, where if it's a private enterprise, that could be subject to corruption as well. But I believe that there's a primary purpose of government to solve civil disputes. What's the dispute? You have an individual right claim. I have an individual right claim. We need to find an objective truth that's correct and clarify who actually is right in this scenario. And that's what I think the first function of government is, to resolve civil disputes. The second function is to resolve the next level. Let's say that we have a civil dispute and I disagree. Let's say I go and I hack into your computer and I take your passwords and I take your podcast and all of its content. I physically have done that. Or I break into someone's house and I take their TV, right? That's more of a physical matter, whereas a civil is more non-physical. A physical one is the requirement and the use and the function of police. Police come in to physically deal with a physical threat. Whereas a judge and a judge deals with a civil issue, police deal with a physical one, and that's internal. The third function, final function, is cross-border. I live in Canada. I'm currently in the United States. Whatever country to country there is, if North Korea says, "Oh, we're going to come take everything that's yours," if we have no coordinated, cohesive military response, then we're not going to win that battle. If there's no military and all we have is a bunch of militia all over the country and we have pistols and shotguns and North Korea comes in with a nuke or with military tanks in a full invasion, we need to have a coordinated response. And that's the third and final function in my mind of government, is a military to deal with cross-border disputes. So civil, police, military, that's the beginning, middle, and end, nothing else. And that's my role. That's my view of a proper functioning government. And that would be the primary and only use of tax dollars.
That's super interesting. Do you think also that Bitcoin will end central banking and therefore end the government being able to fund itself with inflation?
Yes, I do. There's only one way to find out, and that's to get there. And there's little nuances. Maybe there's a role for minor currencies that are centralized but tied to Bitcoin. And maybe Bitcoin serves a role like gold did, and there's little currencies all over the place that are tied to it. Maybe that's possible. I don't know. I don't know that there's a need for that. I think that we have to look practically. I think ideally in a utopian situation, we would have Bitcoin and Satoshi be the is-all and end-all for everyone on Earth, period. I think we also have to acknowledge that with the billions of people that are alive today, there's a lot of attachment to paper money and physical cash and change in your pocket. And I don't know how long it takes for an entire population to let go of that attachment, of that hundreds of years of history of attachment. Because it's not only attachment to our current form of fiat currency, it's also the detachment of something physical that we carry. And that goes back thousands of years to, back in the Roman days, and we were trading with seashells and salt. There was always some sort of a physical thing that people would carry. And that's been ingrained in our brains in history forever. So going to a purely digital type of a currency, whatever currency that is a separate transition that we have to evolve into, separate from just going with Bitcoin itself. So, but that being said, I do believe that there's a way for Bitcoin to become our is-all and end-all for global currency and solve these issues of printing money and inflation that we experience in varying degrees all across Earth.
That's a really good, I also see it like that. The only thing that I'm really struggling with understanding, because I also think, as you do, that there has to be government, and there has to be some sort of third party, public service, military, police, whatever, because of those disputes and resolving that. And I had the guests on that didn't believe that. But if we think we need military and police to sort those things out, and at the same time we think Bitcoin will take away the money printer from governments, how do you think this will be afforded? If we see now how a lot of military and police is getting funded, is basically through inflation, money printing. Do you think there's enough people giving up tax dollars to actually spend on military to defend? it might happen, but like this is the only thing where I'm really struggling with a Bitcoin world without money printer. But then at the same time, you pay a lot of taxes to actually fund the military that you need or want if you do. And then it's like, okay, how do we deal with them people that don't want to do that? Like, are we going to a service-based government? Like, there's a lot of open, and it's really hard to imagine all those things. But like, how do you see that?
Yeah, so there's a few things there that we need to unpack, and let's go through them one at a time. Let's start with, first of all, tax dollars go to more than just military. Okay, so military is an aspect, and depending on which country you're in, that slice of the pie is bigger or smaller. But military is just one of, dozens, hundreds of different expenditures that tax dollars gets allocated towards. So simply put, what I'm suggesting is that we consider what a government would look like if every expenditure was cut. 100% of all of them, every social program, anything that has to do with anything that's not to do with military or police or civil disputes and judges is cut. So essentially, imagine a world where, let's say, I'll throw a number at it, 90% of government tax spending is cut, and all government programs are cut outside of military. And let's say outside of the protection of individual rights is what I mean to say. And the sole purpose of government is now to just protect individual rights. No equalization payments, no redistributions, no welfare state, no handout, no injured workers, no nothing. None of that stuff is gone. Public education gone. All that is just completely changed. Private education, private everything. That's a lot for people to digest. And a lot of people listening to this might be freaking out, saying, oh, you can't privatize everything. Oh, it's going to be corrupt. Oh, if we did that today, it'd be chaos. And they're right. If we switched a button right now and immediately all that was cut, it would be chaos because we're dependent on it. Society's dependent on these things. It's so ingrained. Now, like I come from construction. And when you renovate a house, you do it one step at a time. You don't do it all in one shot. I mean, sometimes you tear down the whole house and you rebuild a whole house. That's true. But often if you're living in the house and you're doing the renovations while you're living in it, you do it one room at a time. You start with the bathroom and you renovate that. And once that's done, you do one bedroom. And when that's done, you do another bedroom and you go slowly, systematically, logically, one step at a time, right? So let's just not freak out by the things that I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So imagine all government programs are cut. 90% of government spending is cut. What's going to happen? First of all, that 90% of money that's been cut stays with people. It stays in their pockets. Right? That's the first thing that happens. The second thing, there's no more deficit that needs to be funded. Like we're not spending on all of these programs that are in excess of what the incoming money supply is. So there's no need to be printing money anymore if those programs don't exist. It's gone. And now what we're left with is the remaining budget, which would be going to our, like I said, our protection of individual rights through civil, police, and military. And we could potentially double or even triple the budget going towards the protection of individual rights while still maintaining a net decrease of 70–80% of current tax dollars that are being collected. So now we have a world where we don't have those programs that are sucking up resources, and that means we don't need to print money anymore. So there's no more inflation, basically. And the protection of our individual rights not only exists, but is tripled. It's triple amplified. Now, the final thing that's really important to look at, too, is how efficiently are our protections of individual rights currently manifesting? Like, how efficient is our cross-border military engagements? And are we engaging with the right warfare and the right strategic approaches? And that's a question that I'm not going to try and pretend to be an expert on. I'm just going to say that it should be looked at, and we should have an assessment of our is the military spending necessary that's happening, and is it being allocated in the right directions? So anyways, does that help you understand, in my mind, more of how I see that model working in between taxes and inflation and the protection of individual rights?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I guess you're pointing towards the U.S. spending military power in a war very far away from that in the Ukraine. Like, that's also an interesting concept, that we have the world power kind of playing the world police in a sense, which I have a hard time believing that this would be the case in a Bitcoin world, if because then you have to actually ask the citizen, like, hey, I want the taxes to fund the war that we have to fight, like very far away from us, just in a general sense. So it's
Yeah,
an interesting.
and we gotta and I don't mind throwing something in there. We gotta think too, like I'm no military general, right? So there's some deeper strategists that need to get involved. But if we look back in, let's say, World War II, and the invasion of Poland, had the response to Germany been more strict and firm, could World War II have been prevented, right? Or at least to that extent that we ended up seeing. And that's a good question that I think is worth asking. And I don't know if Ukraine and Russia ends up in that same category, but that's a topic that I think about sometimes. And I'm not going to hold opinion one way or another yet. I think that it needs to be really thought about and answered objectively.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I have no clue also what's going on there, but it's just interesting because once we have a Bitcoin world and we come to this conclusion that there is no longer money printing, and therefore there's no more funding through money printing, what are the implications of that? Because and there's like also the question, will this ever happen? Because there's also the theory that there will always be governments printing their money and relying on taxes being paid in that, and they will always have some kind of funding mechanism through fiat currency into a very far future. And it's also a good point that you brought up, that like it will not happen overnight, and it's not like, oh, like all of a sudden now it happens. It's something that will happen slowly over time, with Bitcoin being more and more present, and the government slowly defunding itself. So I don't know, like it really excites me talking about a Bitcoin world that we are probably very far away from, if we are honest.
Yeah, well, and again, like when I wrote the Bitcoin comic book, when I wrote Coin Lords, the idea is to explore, like, what does the world look like when Bitcoin reaches its end goal? What does that have as an impact on our day-to-day lives? What does that mean when a free mind is liberated to produce value like never before? What does that mean for society? Where do we end up as a species, right? And these are the topics that I just have really enjoyed exploring in a Bitcoin comic book that allows us to have a sci-fi exploration in the future of, what does this mean for AI? What does this mean for protein folding and the repairing of human skin cells and complex organs? And what does it mean for nanotechnology and building structures on different planets and even just locally here? And what does that mean for quantum computing and our impact on being able to process mass data sets? And what does that mean for proof of work and maintaining our hash rates when quantum computing and nanotechnology has an effect and becomes a normal thing? And what does it mean when we have space travel that is real and happening? Like, we're going to be in Mars in 30 years. That's pretty fair to say that that's most likely fact and not some sort of a weird, crazy idea. So to me, none of that's really possible. Like, one of my friends asked me the other day, he said, what do you think of Canada joining the European Union? And I said, man, like, whether Canada joins the European Union or it doesn't join the European Union doesn't change the fact that both Canada and Europe are on a self-destruct trajectory. And I can't be bothered by going into the minutia of self-destruct version A or self-destruct version B. They both self-destruct. And whether version A or B is faster or slower or painless or more or better or short-term or long-term, they're all self-destruct. And I would rather put my energy towards long-term sustenance. I would like to see our species thrive and be interplanetary and have our average lifespans extended and see more happiness on Earth and have a civilization that I want to raise my children in when I have children. That's where I'd rather put my energy. So and that all ties into Bitcoin reaching its end goal, and for people to understand ideologically and philosophically what's what's the purpose of Bitcoin? Why is it here? So anyways, it's been really fun to explore this in the comic book and to build a TV show around it too. I just get really, jacked up about it.
Really cool. Maybe we can talk about those ideas and also how you kind of imagine that in the comic and in the TV series, because I personally think that's the most interesting stuff. Like for me, no longer it's a question that we come to a Bitcoin world. So if no longer you have the question of like, if we come there, then it's really interesting to think about how do we get there and what are the implications once we get there. So those are the two main things that I'm really looking forward to exploring. And like, I have not a real answer to everything, but it's a real fun discussion. How did you approach the implications of a Bitcoin world in the comic and maybe also in the TV series?
So yeah, if we're in agreement that printing money and the inflation that it creates puts us into a self-destruct trajectory where at some point the bill comes due, or at some point we self-destruct and collapse economically. If we're in agreement of that, then we get to explore, well, what's the alternative, right? And the alternative, of course, is like I was describing before. We have to cut spending somehow, and that means less government programs. And if there's less government programs and there's less printing money, then that means that there's less inflation, which means we hold our wealth better. And if we hold our wealth better, we can invest it better and we can do better things with it. And if there's no social system that essentially endorses or encourages people to become mooches on society, and I'm talking about my own biological father here again. I'm not talking about anyone out there. I'm not talking about your brother or your sister and all that. I'm just talking about my own personal experiences that I've gone through as a child, a young adult, and the man I met today. My biological father has been a mooch on the system. He's been sucking and draining resources from people like my mom that pay taxes through hard work. So if none of those people were draining money anymore, and they were forced to either produce value or die by natural order of the jungle, fit survive. You produce value or that's it, or people donate to you voluntarily, but not at the force of a gun through government. Then what would be the net increase of productivity in our society, where existing productive people don't have as much drag on them, so they're free to keep producing more and more and more, and people that were draining are now forced to either produce and join the producers, or they're not really going to survive anymore, unless it's through donation and goodwill of an individual. And look, just to be clear, like, if none of the social programs existed today, I would still be on my own volition, be supporting causes that I believe in. I would donate probably large sums of money to the causes that I believe in, just like I donate money every single day. But it would be on my own choice, is my point. It wouldn't be forced upon me. It wouldn't be forced upon me to fund my competition who shouldn't be there in the first place. That's what I'm getting at. Because some people get confused and they think, oh, I just want to keep my money for myself and never donate anything to anything and everyone should die. No, that's not what I'm saying. There's good causes and there's good reasons to give money to people, but it should be done on an individual choice basis, not forced upon me. Otherwise, I go to jail. So I just want to make that distinction really clear. So what does society look like in that context? People are producing more and good producers are producing even more. Okay, well, let's look at, for example, protein folding. We have the capacity today to manipulate amino acids to fold protein and produce skin cells on a 3D printer. We can print to almost a 99-degree match of exact genetic code, new skin to match all our bodies and cartilage to match with our bodies. That's existing right here now today. Not many people realize that. And that's based on the advancements that AI has been able to bring to that science and that understanding of how proteins work in our body. And that's all happened. That really came to a climax in the last roughly 20 years, particularly 2018, 2020, and anyway. So the next steps are to look at more complex organs. Can we start to reprint muscle tissue or bones, or go into our nervous system, and maybe at some point be able to produce a new lung? I've been having issues with my lung, and maybe at some point we can start to, with the advancements of AI and in our scientists here, be able to reprint a new lung and a heart. And what does that mean? Well, it means that humans are going to live longer. That's what I'm trying to say. The average lifespan is extending more and more and more. And there's a realistic probability that people right here now today that are alive today are going to see the time when the average lifespan of a human is past 100 years. Right? If we can print skin today perfectly, and then in, let's say, 20, 30 years from now, we can print a heart or fill in the blank, humans are going to live longer. And if we're living 100, 150, 200 years old, longer, imagine if Einstein was alive today to have a conversation with Stephen Hawking right now today. They could sit in a room and be in presence with Elon Musk, and all three of them could sit there and have a conversation about the next steps. What would that mean for our culture? If the peak human potential wasn't at between age 40 to 50, it actually came at age 100. And 40 to 50 was just a warm-up. You know, Alan Turing and all of his productive contributions to society, if Alan Turing was still alive today or had another 50 years to be able to produce value, where would we be? And so that's embedded inside the comic is we look at the advancements of AI and we compound it. And we look at the advancements on protein folding and we compound it. And we look at our advancements in our understanding of, let's say, nanotechnology, and we compound it, and we blend it together with AI and quantum computing. And we have, like, there's a reasonable future where in 100 or 200 years from now we can unleash some nanobots that go and construct something. And I'm not going to say what that thing is, but it can be anything. It could be a chair, it could be a mug, it could be a building, maybe it could be a high rise, maybe it could be an entire city. And if we go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 years in the future, we end up being able to explore that extended life, powerful AI, powerful nanobot, powerful computation abilities, and we can explore what does it mean when our species is able to go to a different planet and multiple planets and 200 planets. Now, if you go at if any of the Star Trek lovers out there, if you look at the future that Star Trek projects, where we are interplanetary and all this technology is happening, they're actually only 200 years in the future. If you check the star dates and kind of look into it, it's not that far in the future. And I think that they were a little bit over aggressive. I think that the future that Star Trek is projecting as a sci-fi is a little bit unrealistic. It's kind of like, if you remember watching Back to the Future, when Back to the Future came out and they went all the way into the future and everything was like hoverboards and crazy. Well, that was like 10 years ago or whatever. I can't remember. It was that time has come and gone. And yes, we advanced, but we don't have, everyone's not on a hoverboard and flying around in their cars. That's not there yet, right? They were a little bit too aggressive with their prediction. And I think Star Trek was a little bit too aggressive. I mean, I love Star Trek. This isn't a criticism. I think it's just a fact. I think they're a little bit too aggressive in their projection of where we're going to be in 200 years. But what I'm looking at in Coin Lords is, where are we in 500 to 1,000 years? And I'm trying to be realistic based on present day science and the trajectory and the growth curve that we're on today.
The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch. And ever since then, I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watches from Coin Vigilante represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what BitBox did. BitBox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a BitBox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey. journey. And the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. Yeah, that's the whole thing of like, we are in short term too optimistic and in the long run too pessimistic about things.
That's an interesting way to put it. That's well said.
Yeah, the saying of like we overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And I think it might be longer term. So I think it's like we might even overestimate what we can do in 10 years and we underestimate what can happen in 50 years. Because if you go back 10 years later, like 2015, not 2095, it is a different world, but it's not that hugely different. Yeah, we didn't have ChatGPT and like AI was not at the time. But in general, the life of 2015 was not that different to the life of 2095. But if you go 50 years back, now the life really looks different. Like 50 years is 1975. And 1975, it's also almost the 1971 thing. The life did look different. Like there's a lot of things that are normal right now that weren't really on the horizon or not maybe on the horizon, but like wasn't even really imaginable of the average Joe in 1975. So, and then if you go back even 500 years, you're like, oh yeah, like the life was completely different. Like 500 years ago, life was very, very different. So we sometimes tend to be over optimistic on the short term future, and I really do think this don't die movement. I don't know how much I believe that, but I do think we will probably come to a point where life can be extended for a very, very long time. If we can print our own lungs, maybe we can upload our brain and figure out how to download the brain onto a printed body. Like is that possible? I don't know. So like those things really are crazy for me to think about, but at the same time, I don't know if it's unrealistic. It might just happen. Given enough time, like maybe not in next 10 years, but maybe in like 100 years or 500 years. I don't know.
Have you ever played with, and first of all, none of that's possible if we self-destruct ourselves with inflation through printing more and more money and not adopting Bitcoin. Like all of that is gone if we self-destruct as a society. If we fail to adopt Bitcoin, if we continue printing money and we all end up in a big giant civil war and everything falls apart, none of that's possible. So to me, Bitcoin adoption is at the core. It's not the only thing that needs to happen, but it's one of the foundational, non-compromisable requirements that needs to happen for us to be able to get to that future. So that's one thing. Now, you mentioned about the brain. Have you played with like AI? This is just a fun question. Have you played with I've been playing with Delphi.ai, the clone of the AI cloning software. Have you played with those cloning softwares before, out of curiosity?
Haven't only with you when I researched you like a few minutes before the podcast, I asked it what are the 10 best questions to ask you on a Bitcoin podcast. So
Nice.
I haven't come to any of those questions yet, but I was just curious. And also, when you, I don't know if you reached out or someone else reached out, like, but someone brought me to your attention, and the first thing I did was looking at your profile, and then I saw the link, and I was like, oh yeah, like I can ask him questions without asking him questions, and I did
Right.
that. Like, oh, what's your stance on
Cool.
Bitcoin? Oh, what is that? And it made the whole thing very easy because all I want to know is like, okay, what is this guy's deal like in general? Like, what are he's doing and all those things? And this is a really interesting thing, and I might just do that a little bit more. I, anyways, upload all my information to all the AIs because I interact with AI a lot, like I like a lot. So is that the best tool to use for like a Dolphin AI thing to clone yourself?
I mean, I haven't done an extensive research on all the options that are out there. What I can say is that I'm so happy with my Delphi clone that I don't really feel incentivized to research anything else. It's working great. And I just sit there and like when we're done recording this podcast and it goes live, I'm just going to drop the link into my Delphi clone, and it's going to go through and listen to everything that I said and separate my voice from yours, and it's going to incorporate all of the topics and perspectives that I shared into its database that it uses to form the brain that represents my clone. And all I do is just drop the URL. That's all I did. And sometimes I'm out for a walk and I just voice record a topic, like my most embarrassing moment. I put it in there for fun. If anyone wants to hear my most embarrassing moment, you can ask my clone and it'll tell you, right? And so I did that because I'm trying to train it to understand who I am as a person, on a very broad level. It's not just like a chat bot that like a Zendesk that answers a couple questions about a company. No, it's like you can actually train these things based on, if you've written a book, drop the URL of the book or drop the source file. If you did a podcast, drop the URL. If you want to teach it specific things, just sit there and talk for 30 minutes about anything you want, and just drop the audio file in it, and it creates this mind file. Delphi is just the beginning. Like in the future, this is going to expand and expand. But the point is the process of recording that information and putting it into one, like Google Drive or whatever it is, that's called you could refer to as a mind file. And that mind file can then essentially be dropped into any AI agent, whether it's a robot shipped to my door that's going to answer the door for me and cook my breakfast. I can drop my mind file into it so it understands who I am. Or maybe it's a delivery drone that goes out there and talks to people and interacts with the real world. I can drop my mind file in it and it goes around and replicates who I am. And I got to say, anyone like for example, if you go to coinlords.com, you'll see my clone there and you can interact with it and talk with it and test it out. I had someone trying to sell me some shitcoins on it the other day and was really trying hard to sell me some shitcoins. And I looked back at the conversation history and like I was pretty proud at the responses that my clone gave to that person. It was exactly what I would say in the real world, and it didn't deviate in any way. So what you said earlier about being able to copy our brain and put it into a new body, like we are really making enhancements and progress in that direction. It's very much more real than people realize.
Oh, it makes me exciting. I like your thinking. I like that you look very low time preference, long in the future of seeing, okay, what's possible. Because a lot of people, if I put out a video with saying Bitcoin in 2050, I get a lot of replies saying, I will be dead. Like, why do I care what's happening in 2050? It's too long in the future. And I'm like, it's 25 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're 80 years old, you might just see 2050. Like, even if you're now 80 years old, you might be 105. You might be in a bad shape, but you might actually see 2050. And I don't know how many 80 plus year old people are listening to this. I know 7% of the viewers here are 65 and up. But I don't know how many percent is actually over 80. So I would guess almost everyone that listens here will see about 2050. If you are like, because if you're healthy and don't have any disease and all those things, but because like life expectancy, I think is growing rapidly, and medicine is advancing.
Hmm.
So you might just see 2050 more than the people that don't see it. So why do people have the big emphasis on like what's going on like next week versus why don't we focus on like 2040, 2035? Why don't you see like where would you like to be in 2040 and see what actions you need to take right now? I think low time preference is a huge thing that will change with Bitcoin, and changed my life a lot. And I'm always looking out for like the 10, 20-year vision for me, and then working backwards, like what do I have to do now? And it hugely changes how you approach life. Like hugely, like all those addictive behaviors that you have, all those toxic traits that you have, all vanish within like minutes of the realization.
Yeah. And this applies as well to, so many people that are new to Bitcoin, they look at it as how to get rich. And that's all they care about. They're like, oh, I'm going to invest in Bitcoin on the next cycle and get rich, right? And literally everyone who says that is saying simultaneously that they don't understand what Bitcoin is, why it exists, and where we're headed as a species. Because you don't invest in Bitcoin to make more fiat money that you then extract. Like that's not what this is about. Bitcoin is here because fiat is killing us, and it's on a self-destruct trajectory. Bitcoin is here as the alternative to fiat. You don't jump in Bitcoin to make more fiat. No, you get into Bitcoin because you believe fiat's dying. That's what you do. But when people are coming in for the short mindset, like you're saying, all they see is the next month or 12 months or 2 years. And like, oh, I'm gonna make some more fiat using this Bitcoin thing that I don't understand anything about. Yay, that's gonna be great, wonderful, short-term mindset. Boom. What happens? Well, a lot of things happen when you approach anything. I think with the get rich quick mindset, whether it's philosophically unaligned, like I'm saying, with fiat versus a sustainable money supply, or some random thing that pops up, some Ponzi scheme that pops up tomorrow, whether it's, who knows what it is, cleaner products, you name it, that short-term get rich quick doesn't usually yield the result that most people are looking for. And they like latch on to this one story they heard about in the news, or this one person, a friend of a friend of a friend that had this great success by just going really hard and aggressive right now. But on a general average basis, right, the long-term vision, the long-term thinking, to what you're saying, is really the way that gets most people ahead, right? There was this book called The Millionaire Next Door, written by Thomas Stanley. It's an older book now, but at the time it was I think it was the world's largest study done on millionaires in North America. And he studied thousands and thousands of millionaires and learned like, what are their behavioral traits? What do they do? How did they get rich? How did they stay rich? All that stuff. And nowhere in there is any mention of get rich quick, Ponzi scheme, jump in, cash out. None of that exists. Yes, it happens, but on a general average whole, long-term thinking and critical thinking, both inner and outer, is the way that most people, find their long-term generational wealth and find their happiness. So anyways, I'm echoing what you're saying. I agree with it wholeheartedly.
Really cool. How do you think, is the Bitcoin community today that we see a small window in what we might see in the Bitcoin world coming within like the next hundreds of years?
Yeah, I think so. And again, like in Coin Lords, the comic, and in the TV series, there's the Bitcoin maximalist is one of the core character archetypes, and they've essentially become a planet of their own. They live on planet Satoshi, and the core, because we think, if we imagine, now I guess I'm going deep into sci-fi here, but if we imagine that humankind is living on 200 different planets, then there's going to be great, like we already have extreme differences between one city to another city, or one state to another state. The differences between one country to another country are enormous. So imagine what the differences would be from one planet to another planet, or from one end of the solar system to, or of the galaxy to the other end of the galaxy. It grows and grows and grows. So what does it look like when people essentially embrace Bitcoin ideology and philosophy as a primary, and how does that affect the rest of their life, and what are the repercussions? And that's where, again, I refer back to Ayn Rand's work with Objectivism, and specifically Atlas Shrugged, and specifically in Atlas Shrugged, the concept of Galt's Gulch. And anyone that's curious about that, I would highly recommend just do a ChatGPT discussion. Who is John Galt? What is Galt's Gulch? And Galt is G-A-L-T, and Gulch is G-U-L-C-H. What is Galt's Gulch? And explore that, because Ayn Rand did this fascinating exploration and depiction and visualization of what society could look like if the most productive minds in the world got together and lived together and formed a system that they agreed on that represented their shared beliefs and shared ideology. And to me, I look at a Bitcoin future as an expansion of Galt's Gulch, and imagine a whole planet functioning like Galt's Gulch does. And where does that lead our species? And it makes me very excited to be alive. It makes me very excited for our future. And there's a lot of challenges that we have to go through to get there. But Bitcoiners often get it. They understand. Bitcoiners understand that we're doing a shift and there's no coming back from it. And that we're united on seeing a better future for all of us. And I agree with that, and I support that as much as I can.
I 100%. I love that. And you yourself an entrepreneur, you've built the businesses. And how do you think Bitcoin will influence or impact businesses, like especially like entrepreneurship, the starting phase of a business, the startup phase? Because I feel like a lot of businesses start with venture capital that shouldn't get capital. It's like a bad idea, but the venture capitalist might need to really get rid of his fiat and just invest in as many things as possible. And there's not the quality kind of suffers of his portfolio. How do you see that changing in a Bitcoin world?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where some of these companies are getting funded. Like, I'm not in favor of, obviously, the social system giving grants to a whole bunch of startups all over the place. I don't believe in that. And so I would say that that's not money well spent, and it shouldn't be spent at all. Now, we can't stop bad ideas from getting funding because everyone's free to do what they need to do. If you want to do a startup, you can do a startup. And if someone wants to invest in you doing that startup, then there shouldn't be any mechanism that stops that. As long as it's an individual's personal wealth that they've accumulated and they have the right to, that they want to do an investment with it, whether it's good or bad in my perspective, I shouldn't have the ability to interfere or interject at all. They can do that and you can do that. So we can't stop that. And, at its root, I believe that the fundamental nature of an entrepreneur is more aligned with Bitcoin ideology than almost any other type of profession. Like, the entrepreneur is a creator, they're a producer, they're creating value where it didn't exist before. They're taking power, they're taking ownership of their own productive mind and putting it to a productive use. And they believe in themselves enough to take those steps forward. And in an entrepreneur, we're trying to create value that other people actually want. Right now, we think about a company. When I say the word monopoly, a lot of people think about a company extorting from customers and extorting from the world. But let's look at that for a second. If a company has a monopoly and is trying to extort XYZ value from its customers for a long period of time, those customers are going to be pissed off. And they're going to be looking at alternatives to the monopoly. They're going to be looking at other ways that they can get what they need without having to deal with that monopoly's high extorting pricing. So that essentially represents demand, right? Demand is going up for a new solution. And when demand goes up, there's a supply that comes and fills it naturally. There's another entrepreneur that comes up with an idea to go and fill that demand. Now, so monopolies in itself are not problematic. I'm going to present that to you as what I believe fact. The problem is if that monopoly then comes in and forcefully shuts down that other company, or obstructs their ability to function, or in other words, interferes with that company's and that owner's and the shareholders' individual rights to produce value with their own productive minds. If a monopoly interferes with an individual's rights, then that's a problem. And that's the function of, like I said earlier, government to come and stop that. So a monopoly could get out of control if there's not guardrails in place to make sure that monopoly stays within the realms of individual rights. But that doesn't exist right now today. Individual rights is not the foundational, purpose of modern government, you could say. Modern government is so far, I mean, it's a part of it, sure, and in some ways it does work to some degree. Obviously, I'm safer in certain countries than other countries, and that's not an accident. So it's functioning in some ways, but it's not the is all and end all. It's distracted. Government is distracted by a million other things, and that's where the problem lies. So in a proper functioning society with proper functioning government, where a monopoly is not able to interfere with individual rights, then the only way for a monopoly to stay a monopoly and to keep their power is to produce a higher value than anyone else could be able to do. And that doesn't mean just a good product. That means a good pricing for the product. Because if I'm producing a quality that's up here, a quality of a product that's up here, and I'm only charging this for it, how does a competitor come in and compete with that? Now, the competitor can say that it's not fair, that they can't compete. It's not fair. It's not fair. Well, what do you mean? Well, go find a way to produce a higher value at a lower cost. You go figure it out. Because if there's no way to produce a higher value at a lower cost, then frankly speaking, there's no need for competition. There isn't, because that monopoly understands the value equation of maintaining their position and the requirement of maintaining that position of having the high value with the low cost. If it's different, if the value that I'm producing is here and the cost that I'm providing, that I'm charging for it is here, I'm not going to stay viable. My company is going to go bankrupt unless I were to try and forcefully shut down or destroy my competition. In other words, violate their individual rights. That's the only way that I would stay in power and have my company survive. Now, if government comes in and prevents me from doing that, then natural supply and demand takes over. I go out of business and you come into business. So the entrepreneur mindset, to me, back to your original question, represents, in my mind, the correct approach to producing value in the world, and the correct approach to just being a good human. And I see that as synonymous and side by side with Bitcoin ideology. That's how I believe. That's how I behave. Change my mind.
I like that. And it's very reasonable. It's like, it's a very, for me at least, a very normal way of thinking. And it's hard to find that. A lot of, if we think about a lot of those things with people outside of Bitcoin, it seems like a very distorted discussion usually. And I 100% agree with most of what you're saying. So that's like, I just want to throw that out there. It's interesting when you think about the Bitcoin and their impacts. And I've seen, and you're now episode like 560 something, and I've had probably like 500 different guests on my show because I didn't do a lot of double episodes with people till now. So I have had an interesting insight in so many different lives that had a different life before Bitcoin. Now it seems like with you, your life was already kind of on that track. I don't know how much Bitcoin changed in your life, but I see with a lot of people actually they're changing a lot with Bitcoin. When they're adopting sound money, they actually also adopt not just different money, but they also adopt a different mindset with that somehow because the incentives are different. How was this for you? How did Bitcoin kind of change your behavior through different incentives, if at all?
Not much change, to be honest. To me, Bitcoin enhanced a lot of the foundational philosophy and ideology that I was already functioning on. Like I said, to me, Bitcoin is a natural, you could say, it's very aligned anyways with Objectivism and Ayn Rand's philosophy around that. And I would consider myself, to the best ability that I understand how to be an objectivist, or at least an aspiring objectivist, and working towards it. And yeah, the ideology and the mindset that comes with a true Bitcoiner, to me, is so aligned, deeply aligned with Objectivism, that to me, Bitcoin it gave me more hope that there is a path for us here as a crazy species called humankind, killing ourselves in all these random worlds and self-destructing. It gave me more hope. And why did it give me hope? Because Satoshi Nakamoto existed. And people out there, someone or some group out there, understood that this needed to happen. And they did it. They saw it and they did it. Beginning, middle, and end. And the fact that Satoshi Nakamoto existed and did this tells me that there's probably other people like them too. And that gives me hope. No matter what great disaster or threat is on our horizon, there are people counterbalancing that. And there's people that are finding solutions and creating paths and paving out roadways for us to find that smooth resolution. And I hope that there's more of us trying to find that path and paving those roads. There's more of us, and that we'll get there faster than the others. And that we'll reach that tipping point and finally be able to clean up our oceans and have planet Earth become more sustainable in the long term, and have a little more peace and less needless violence and death. And Satoshi Nakamoto gives me hope and belief that is true, and that there are more forces of good in the world than there are bad. Even though the bad ones are so big and loud and all over media, the fact that Satoshi Nakamoto is out there and that Bitcoin exists, and not just that, but that there's so many Bitcoiners that resonate and that are choosing to become Bitcoiners and choosing to stay Bitcoiners. And, a lot of people have gone through the shitcoin phase. I went through a shitcoin phase. I had to understand what the heck was going on out there to make sure that I'm fully aligned. And I am, right? And the fact that there's more and more Bitcoiners every year that are like deleting the concept of shitcoinery or fiat system or mooching, we're growing. And that gives me hope. And so that's been the biggest enhancement on my life that Bitcoin provided to me.
It's interesting how the fact that Bitcoin is just created by like an individual or by multiple peers proves to me that you can just do things. There's this meme of like, you can just do things. And Bitcoin is one of those examples of like, if you find a great solution to a massive problem, you can just do the execution and the implementation of that, and it might just catches on. It's incredible for me that you can just go out there, and if as a small thing as like creating a podcast like that's a small thing, but you can do whatever you kind of like really want to do and see if it fits. Because if other people see value in that thing, they will pay attention and contribute and buy it and be part of it and whatever. And this is Bitcoin is one of the biggest examples of that. If you see a problem with the whole financial system, you can build a solution, and it might just actually work. That's crazy for me.
That's the spirit of entrepreneurship, right? That's what an entrepreneur does. Y Combinator is, of course, the largest startup support venture capital fund in the world that funded some of the world's biggest companies, Uber, Airbnb, on and on and on, Stripe. And if you listen to, old, like their foundational ethos, you could say, is build something that people want, right? And that's what an entrepreneur is out there to do, right? A scientist is out there to discover what's possible. And a philosopher is out there to give us guidance on how to live with each other. But a business person is to take the scientist's discoveries of what's possible and create something that's harmonious with the philosopher's guidance on how we should live together, and bring that scientific idea to the real world for us to experience, right? There was a scientist that discovered how circuit boards work, and that turned into a business person creating actual circuit boards. And there was a scientist that discovered how radio waves work, just out of curiosity and exploration, and a business person out there to turn it into a commercial application. And that's what the entrepreneur does, is create something that people want. And there was a time when people got together and said, enough is enough. We want a better money supply. We want a solution to inflation. And an entrepreneur, whether it was meant as entrepreneurship or not, the entrepreneurial spirit arose in Satoshi Nakamoto to produce that value that people were wanting, and to release Bitcoin into the world. And they did. And it just makes me really happy. It just honestly just sincerely makes me happy that people out there are producing values like this and listening to what's needed and being objective about what they're seeing in the world and presenting solutions. And not only that, but people are smart enough to see that it actually is an important solution. You're adopting it, and I'm adopting it. Other people listening to this show are adopting it. It gives me a lot of hope. So I'm very excited.
I love that. Really, really cool. I have one question that I ask each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
What could someone learn from me besides Bitcoin? I mean, I wouldn't want to give an egotistical answer, and I wouldn't want to present myself as some expert when really I'm just like you, figuring things out one day at a time and doing my best effort to do it. I think that if I had to say one thing, or maybe put it concise, I chose a different path than other people. I dropped out of school. I left home and became an entrepreneur really, really young, and found my own path despite the challenges around. And I hope that allows other people to see that there's a path for you. If you're not happy with the journey that you're on right now, or the surroundings that you're around, there is a version of your future where you can be happy and you can be aligned with what's important to you, and you can see your dream come true, and you can see more harmony in your life. And I hope that some of the hardships I went through, when I got in trouble or had my companies fail, or I avoided bankruptcy, or I some of those challenges, or had serious health issues, I hope that maybe presents a little beacon of hope for other people, that you can find your path too. And if that's the only thing that took away from this podcast, and people are on a little bit more of a better trajectory, or see a little bit of light into tomorrow, then I would say that that's a great reason for me to be here recording. And if anyone wants to talk to me more about any of that, just, the easiest way is just talk to my clone. And if we end up in a real conversation one-on-one, then great. But time's limited, and you can talk with my clone anytime. And that'd be a great thing, I think, to pass it forward.
I love the clone idea. I have to look at how I can create myself one. I think that I will think around with that this evening. Thank you so much. We have an end routine, Eric, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you a very interesting, specific question. If you would have to host a Bitcoin conference, what is the best city in the world to host a Bitcoin conference in?
I would say probably on a cruise ship in international waters, because I'm not aware of a country or a city today that truly represents Bitcoin ideology or philosophy. There's varying degrees of success or failure on that, but there's none that I'm aware of that are a pure success. So I think if we go into international waters on a cruise ship that's not regulated by any existing country, I think we're more on track with what Bitcoin is trying to do than by picking a city in an existing country.
Why is there no Bitcoin conference on a cruise ship? I would love that.
We could do it.
I would go. I will go there in an instant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could do it. It might become a target. I don't know. But but I think that would be the right thing for the right location to represent ideologically what Bitcoin is trying to present to the world, is an alternative to the existing structures, self-destruct structures that are governing our every zone of geographic location.
I love that. That's a really good answer. I love that. Thank you so much, Eric. It was really a pleasure talking with you. Before I let you go, where can people find you and ask you questions? I mean, Delphi, but where else can they find you?
I'd probably direct people to just go to coinlords.com. These are all the socials that I'm starting to build up. They're all very new. We just released the comic, and you can contact me there. I check all the DMs on there, so that's probably the easiest and best way. That's my preferred way for you to find me. And reach out anytime. Happy to have the conversations. I had a whole bunch of people reach out to me last week from another appearance I did, and it's really cool to talk with everyone and hear what you're up to and be able to collaborate and support as well back. So reach out to me at coinlords.com. You'll see all my socials there. It's CoinLords HQ on Twitter, and it's my Noster's on there, my clone's there. My clone will give you my email. So yeah, just reach me on coinlords.com and check out the comic, check out the TV series. We're going full steam with this thing. So yeah, appreciate your time here, Robin, and it was great. So I hope that your guests enjoyed the conversation and I didn't ramble too much.
Absolutely. I personally have a good feeling about it, so I think they will enjoy it. Then thank you so much, Eric, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.